Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where you will learn about infodemic inoculation, exercising thought intelligence through whole brain thinking. My first guest is Dr. Andy Norman, who teaches philosophy and directs the Humanism Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. Andy authored the popular Brainstorm column for the Humanist Network News and works at understanding how ideologies corrupt moral understanding. His work has appeared in free inquiry essays in the Philosophy of Humanism and dozens of other journals. Andy lives in Pittsburgh with his wife of 20 years, 2 fascinating kids, and a dog. And Andy is in the house talking about his newest book, Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. That's like practically a prayer.
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, that's all you. And I'm really excited to talk about your book, Mental Immunity.
Me too.
Because boy, oh boy, I feel like the last few years have really messed with our brains and our mental fitness.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
Here's the basic idea. Just as our bodies have immune systems that protect us from one or another degree from infectious microbes, our minds, it turns out, have immune systems that protect us, again, to one or another degree, from infectious ideas. Scientists are increasingly talking about infectious ideas and infectious ideologies as mind parasites, and they're coming to the conclusion that infodemics are a real phenomenon that can skew our thinking in ways that harm us all. And the good news is that we can actually hack the mind's immune system for good in the same way that immunologists use vaccines to hijack the body's immune system and give us deeper immunity to infectious microbes.
Oh gosh, tell us how. we are in sore need of some of that.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, let me try to make this idea of the mind's immune system real to you. And then when I get to the how, it'll actually be that much more convincing.
We're all ears.
All right. So Lisa, maybe you can do a thought experiment with me. Pick something that you're really proud of or something that's really precious to you and let me know what it is.
Oh gosh, I'm so proud of my kids' success in being decent human beings. So proud.
Okay. Terrific start. Now, imagine going online one day and seeing that some troll online has been tearing down one of your children, just calling them insignificant, tearing down their characters. Now, try to imagine that as vividly as you can, and then ask yourself, what happens in your mind when you see something like that?
Well, I want to question, is it real? Is it not real? I want to go to that child or children and say, what's up with this? Tell me more about this. Why is this out there?
Beautiful. So questions swarm into your mind, like, who is this guy anyway? Yeah. And who let this jerk onto the internet, right? And where's he getting his information? Because it's surely bad, and his logic must be terrible, right? These are all questions that just swarm into the mind when we're confronted with threatening information. Now, what you've just done, Lisa, so that's the mind's immune system at work, bringing questions to bear to protect the mind against a threat. Now, and the thought experiment we've just done is exactly like the thought experiment that a Russian zoologist conducted in 1908 when he actually discovered the body's immune system, or actually the agents of the body's immune system. The guy's name is Elie Metchnikoff. And what he did is he took a starfish and he stabbed it with a tangerine thorn, and he stuck it under a microscope. And he watched as white blood cells rushed to the scene of the injury and engulfed the tip of the thorn and tried to basically consume it, tried to neutralize it. And Metchnikoff actually won a Nobel Prize for this discovery. And my claim is that questions and doubts and reservations are the mind's antibodies in the same way that white blood cells, T cells, B cells are the body's antibodies. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what you're saying is doubt, critical thinking, curiosity. These are all the ingredients that are required to build this mental immunity.
Exactly. They're the heart of the mind's immune system. That's exactly right. And one of the really exciting things about this is that critical thinking skills, which have actually been sort of the emphasis of higher education for close to a century now, they actually turn out to be a small part of the mind's immune system. And so we haven't been doing enough to give people deep immunity to bad ideas. And as a result, right, we're witnessing contagions of irrationality spread across the internet in ways that are tearing at the social fabric.
Not just across the internet, it's within families. I mean, this is dirty business that's going on.
That's right. And bad ideas have spread through social networks for thousands of years. This is not something new since the internet was invented. The philosophers that I've studied much of my life were real deeply concerned about irrationality and how ideologies, how infectious ideas can actually, they didn't use this. Philosophers have only begun to use the language of infection and inoculation recently, but going all the way back to Plato and Socrates, they could watch crazy thinking spread through ancient Athens, and they were wondering, what do we do about this? And Socrates, one of my heroes, came up with the famous Socratic Method, which is a way of using questions to, number one, calm the mind's immune system, and number two, actually build and deepen our immunity. So in the book, I actually take the famous Socratic Method and I say, hey, it's time for an upgrade. We can take this. The Socratic Method is arguably one of the most powerful mind inoculants of all time, but we can enhance it because we now have all this evidence coming out of psychology that helps us understand how the mind's immune system works. And if you take that knowledge and you apply it, you can actually take the Socratic Method to the next level and turn it into a powerful mind vaccine that can deepen our immunity to all kinds of morally disorienting ideas.
Well, what you're saying makes sense. If we look at how the mind works and when we are in fear or when we are anxious and the disconnection from sort of the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex, right? We're sort of operating in this fight or flight mode. And when people get heated about some of the garbage that is out there,
Exactly.
They're in that state of fear and uncertainty. And so that's what's propelling. That's the juice. I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. And you're saying it so well yourself, Lisa. The brain has two separate systems that kind of work in opposite directions to try to maintain a certain balance. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in when we feel a threat, and it puts us in fight or flight mode, right? And when in our thought experiment, some troll online was attacking your son's or your daughter's character, that triggers the sympathetic nervous system and makes us want to fight back. And it makes our mind's immune system want to fight back. But it turns out you can't think clearly or fairly when that part of your brain is taking control.
Yeah.
But there's another system in the brain called the parasympathetic system that actually, it's kind of the rest and recover system in the brain. And when you actually use dialogue and non-threatening questions to calm the mind and slip it from the sympathetics in charge to the parasympathetics in charge, you can actually begin to induce the sort of judicious, critical thinking that we all need to live together on this small, fragile planet.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm thinking of sort of the application of it, the really being in action with this stuff. And for example, I'll give a very simple example. I have a relative who shall remain nameless.
Okay. Yes.
And when I ask this relative or two or three to explain to me that, why they believe what they believe around a certain set of political stories. Mm-hmm. And they get so passionate and heated and fired up and angry, but they cannot explain a word with facts.
You're actually doing exactly the right thing, Lisa. So all the research shows that, so I call this the cranky uncle problem. And I borrowed that. Yeah, I got that. Yeah, don't we all, right?
Yeah.
I borrowed the name from a critical thinking app that one of my colleagues has developed. It's where you get to interact with a cranky uncle and you try to figure out what to say to your cranky uncle. And if you say the wrong things, he gets even crankier. And if you say the right things, it calms him down and actually opens his mind, perhaps just a little, to actually learning. And so it's kind of cool. I'd recommend you check it out.
Yeah. What's the name of that?
It's called Cranky Uncle, and John Cook is the brain behind it. He's done a lot of research on mind inoculation against.
Maybe we have to have Uncle John come on the show.
Yeah. Well, John will talk about his cranky uncle, maybe. Yes.
He could be my adopted uncle, Uncle John, the voice of reason.
Right. Well. So an app can nudge you in the right direction on how to have these difficult conversations. But there's actually a lot of that an app can't do to teach you how to converse in a constructive way. Now, Lisa, I think you have excellent instincts on this. If you just kind of, my wife encourages me to call it the "tell me more" method. So
tell me more.
I call it the new Socratic method because I want to emphasize my continuity to my philosophical forebearers.
And your scholarly etiquette.
Yeah, that too, right. And scholarly pretension. Maybe that's part of it as well.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but.
But yeah, just, listening to your cranky uncle and just say, tell me more, and letting them struggle to articulate their passionate views is in some ways, so the kind of conversation that can open a closed mind, is one that holds up a mirror so that the person can actually see the glitches in their own worldview. And if you point out those glitches, they're probably going to dig their heels in and push back and get angry. But if you just listen and ask clarifying questions, a lot of times they'll start to see the gaps in their own understanding themselves. And that's the kind of opening you need to create if you're going to reach people like that.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Andy Norman about his latest book, Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. To learn more, please visit andynorman.org, on Twitter at Dr. Andy No, and on Facebook, Andy Norman Author. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back. Wait. Before we take that quick pause, let's get real about the priceless value of a sound body and mind for a happy life. Optimal mental health is an absolute essential to our performance and well-being. Taking care of our mental health should not be a luxury, but a self-care necessity. And that's why I'm proud to be partnered with Talkspace Online Therapy and also a client. Change is hard, and yet it is one of the only guarantees in life. And sometimes we all need a little support to navigate life's ups and downs. Online therapy can help us jumpstart a shift in perspective, teach new tools to cope in difficult times, and be a guiding light in the stormy seas of life. And that's why I wholeheartedly recommend Talkspace. Therapy can help catalyze change and positively improve your relationships, your career, and your overall happiness. Talkspace lets you send and receive text, video, or voice messages to your dedicated therapist 24/7 on the Talkspace platform, and they'll engage with you daily, 5 days a week. Best of all, Talkspace is a fraction of the cost and more convenient than in-person therapy. It's like having your own on-call mental health angel. And Talkspace is the #1 online therapy platform that has thousands of licensed therapists trained in more than 40 specialties, including anxiety, depression, substance abuse, trauma, anger management, relationship issues, food and eating, and so much more. Talkspace is a private and secure HIPAA-compliant platform that uses the latest end-to-end bank-grade encrypted technology that provides a secure virtual space to talk it out with your therapist from the comfort and privacy wherever you are, whenever, and for whatever is on your mind. Feeling seen, heard, and understood always makes us feel better. And as a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com. Make sure to use the code HAPPINESS to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's happiness and Talkspace.com. Now let's grab that quick break.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back. But before we return to the conversation, I want to remind y'all about the value of playtime, even for us adults. Research says that play helps relieve stress, boosts creativity, and stimulates the mind. Plus, it improves relationships and our connections to others. Remember when you were a kid for just a second? Yep, close your eyes. Did the thought of playing put a smile on your face? For me, it does. I used to love Monopoly, Twister, and Spite and Malice. Great memories and good times. One thing was and is certain. Taking the time to play makes us happy. And today, Best Fiends is my favorite casual mobile puzzle game with more than 100 million downloads. What I love most is that Best Fiends challenges me to use my brain in new ways to strategize and conquer new levels. This gives me a shot of adrenaline that makes me feel like a winner. I'm working my way towards level 4,500 and counting. Best Fiends is my go-to digital play pal, and I'm happily hooked. And if you're anything like me, you will be too. The fun never ends at Best Fiends because there is always something new to explore. There is no game over. With thousands of puzzle levels, you'll never run out of goals to achieve. Don't blame me if you end up kind of obsessed and find yourself playing in strange places. Go ahead and play more. Come join me for a squeaky, clean, good time. Download the 5-star rated puzzle game Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Now let's get back to the conversation. Welcome back. We're talking about infodemic inoculation, exercising thought intelligence through whole brain thinking. Let's get back to the conversation with my guest, Dr. Andy Norman. Andy, I want to talk about how our mental immune systems have been compromised. You know, the forces out there in the world that has sort of seen the fragility, of our thinking or maybe our way of life and then tapped right into it, like with laser precision.
Yes. Yeah. So the deep story behind our weird post-truth world is a story of neglect and abuse. So it turns out we've actually been neglecting our mental immune health for decades. And let me just give one example. In the book, I identified 6 ideas that have taken root in most of our minds and which diminish our mental immunity. One of them is the idea that everyone is entitled to their opinion. Now, this idea has a long history, and it's subscribed to both on the left and on the right, and it induces kind of a culture of entitlement. I'm entitled to my beliefs, get out of my face. Right? The problem with that is that there's a confusion between legal right or legal entitlement and a moral right or moral entitlement. So I might be legally entitled to misogynistic viewpoints or white supremacist nonsense, but I'm not morally entitled to those things.
No.
And if I use the idea that I'm entitled to my opinions to defend irresponsible believing, I'm actually compromising my own mental immune health. Because a healthy immune system will examine your own ideas, your own beliefs, and modify them where necessary. And when you use excuses like everyone is entitled to their opinion to evade your responsibility to cultivate and nurture your mind properly, you end up being a sitting duck for propagandists and demagogues. And that's the other piece of the story. I mentioned abuse and neglect and abuse. Second part of the story is the abuse, right?
Yeah.
There are people in our culture who actually are very adept at hijacking mental immune systems and feeding you a bunch of nonsense for political or economic gain. And until we learn to protect ourselves against such things, we're in for a really rough time.
I agree with you. And something that you said, about beliefs really brought this thought to mind, that beliefs, thoughts, and feelings are not facts. They're our own, right? So they're unimpeachable. Those experiences that we have of belief, thought, and feelings, right? We can take ownership of what they are, but they are in fact not fact.
And one of the most powerful things you can do to keep your beliefs, feelings, attitudes healthy is to check them against the facts, to see whether they're coherent with the evidence, right? You've probably heard Daniel Patrick Moynihan's famous quote, everyone is entitled to their opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Right?
Yes.
I cite that approvingly, but I think it actually doesn't go far enough. It's true that we need to acknowledge facts and let facts and evidence modify our belief systems, but it's also true that our values be responsibly chosen and held. So it's not okay to say facts are constrained by evidence, but you can have whatever values you darn well please. That's just not enough to give us deep immunity to, in fact, morally disorienting ideas are often the tip of the wedge that leads us into science denial and fact-resistant thinking.
Well, we're in it now,
Yeah.
Every day we all see evidence of this. And I would say, regardless of what side of the aisle or what side of conspiracy one may or may not be on, I think everybody's pointing the finger at one another. But the morality, the values that you talk about, maybe that's the weak link, right? We don't spend enough time in schools and in our homes, maybe talking about this moral compass that we all agree upon that exists so we can all be in society together.
Yeah, and Socrates, way 2,400 years ago, basically wandered the streets saying, hey, just having deep conversations about what really matters, that's the best possible life. And I was like, yeah, sure, Socrates, that's a pretty self-congratulatory thing to say. But I've actually come around to the view that we all need to do a whole lot more of that when you do take time to discuss your values with friends in a non-competitive, combative way, your moral understanding deepens and you become a better version of yourself, a better, wiser version of yourself. And when we don't make time to have those conversations, to examine our values and modify them in light of what we learn in the process, we're shortchanging ourselves, because a much happier existence is out there waiting for us if we just make time to have those conversations and conduct them in a fruitful way.
Let's talk about vaccinating ourselves against mind parasites.
Okay. Yes.
Where do we find this?
Well, the mind vaccine is, I develop it in chapter 12 of the book, Mental Immunity, but I'll give you the short version of it now. So philosophers have known for a long time that critical but also friendly conversation is the way to deepen your mind's resistance to bad ideas. That goes way back. What we have now are the tools of immunology and an emerging science of what I call cognitive immunology to actually sharpen the techniques that philosophers have long used. So what I call the new Socratic method takes the method of questioning that Socrates recommended, urges us to do it in gentle, affirming ways. Socrates, by the way, had a bit of a taste for gotcha moments, and he would sometimes use questions to kind of to make people look silly, right? And some of my philosophical colleagues love that kind of thing. But I actually think it's counterproductive. When you use questions to produce gotcha moments, people become more resistant to revising their thinking. But if you use questions, primarily clarifying questions, to just try to understand people's point of view and let them know they're heard, and to encourage them to actually just nudge them gently to actually answer the kind of questions that it clearly makes sense to ask, given that they're saying X, Y, or Z. When you do that, they start to become more reflective themselves, and their own mental immunity starts to grow.
So I'm going to just rephrase or paraphrase what you just said, because what I'm also hearing is the ability to be a deep listener, a good listener, and ask these powerful, open-ended questions or specific questions, or just questions in general in a non-judgmental way, that it is really that element that builds our immunity.
Yeah. And so at the very heart of good critical thinking is you encounter an idea that you're not sure is true, or a claim that you think you disagree with. The number one thing a philosopher learns to do in a situation like that is suspend judgment first.
Yep.
Number two, ask the kind of questions that it makes sense to ask. And then look at the reasons pro and con on both sides. You can't just look at the reasons on one side and think that you've settled the matter. And then preferably in conversation with somebody who views things differently, you try to sum up what you've learned from each other into a kind of a more nuanced judgment about whether the original claim was right, wrong, or in need of refinement. So yes, you have to actually suspend judgment and then try to find out. When you assume you already know, and you just go straight towards condemning or judging other people, you miss out on opportunities to learn. But if you suspend judgment in the way that you say, you hold open the door to becoming a deeper, wiser, and happier person.
Yeah. And that curiosity that you express towards another person ultimately builds connection, which is the life force. That's what we're here to do, is be connected.
Absolutely. And, quite apart from the joys and, nothing promotes happiness more than, strong friendships. I think the research out of social psychology is pretty clear about that.
Yeah.
But one thing we're learning about mental immunity is that deepening mental immunity is a team sport. You can't go off into your own bubble or into a bubble of like-minded people and build deep mental immunity. You have to have conversations with people who disagree with you, and you have to listen to their concerns, because a lot of times their concerns are bringing relevant considerations to light. And until you've appreciated them and given them due weight, you're depriving yourself of wisdom.
And I think we can all agree that making the cranky uncle smile feels pretty good.
Yes.
It's a metaphor, of course, but when we can sort of find Rumi's field, in those conversations.
Yeah. And you want to, and ideally you get cranky uncle to smile before you raise anything like a question that might cause him consternation or get him anxious, right? You win somebody's trust. The research again and again shows that if somebody doesn't trust you, the things you say won't affect them. So you have to win their trust first, and then you have the right to begin to change their minds on deeper fundamental issues.
Oh, this is such good stuff. This is, for me, and I hope for everyone out there who is listening, food for thought around your dinner table tonight, as it will be around mine. The book we're talking about today is Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. And that's probably should be a blessing for everybody. that my guest and the author, Andy Norman, blesses you with all of this.
Well, I don't know if I'm in the blessing business, but I try to help.
But you know what I'm saying. This is the antidote to, I think, where we've been for the last several years, and coming out the other side and seeing some light, to have these deeper, meaningful conversations. To learn more about Andy Norman and his work, blessing, no blessing, doesn't matter. Go to andynorman.org, on Twitter at Dr. Andy No, and on Facebook, he is at Andy Norman Author. Once again, the book we've been speaking about is Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy, thanks so much for sharing your work with us today. This is really good stuff.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to your listeners for their attention and consideration.
Let's take that quick pause. We'll be right back.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness, and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
And we're back, continuing the conversation about infodemic inoculation, exercising thought intelligence through whole brain thinking. My next guest is Dr. John Cook. Cranky Uncle is the creation of scientist and cartoonist John Cook, who uses cartoons, humor, and critical thinking to expose the misleading techniques of science denial and build public resilience against misinformation. John Cook is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Climate Change Communication Research Hub at Monash University. He obtained his PhD at the University of Western Australia, studying the cognitive psychology of climate science denial. His research focuses on understanding and countering misinformation about climate change, and I think just misinformation too, John, if I'm correct.
Yes, because my work has increasingly focused on critical thinking, it's really started to be applicable to every type of misinformation across all topics.
So let's talk about everybody's cranky uncle, cranky parent, cranky sibling, the crank that is going along right now around the world. What impact does misinformation have on society?
Well, misinformation and science denial, unfortunately, has a lot of really negative impacts. I've been studying it in climate change for the last decade, and in that we see that misinformation and denial breed distrust of scientists. It obviously can cause people to believe wrong things or just stop them believing accurate things. And it can reduce people's support for climate action, which is something that we really desperately need these days. But then it also has these other downstream effects, and we've seen that over the last year. When you breed an environment of distrusting scientists, then when you have issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, it becomes much easier for people to distrust medical scientific experts. And then that can cause people to behave in dangerous ways, like not wearing masks, not social distancing, ignoring expert advice. And then that endangers the health of the whole community.
Well, the health of the world. You know, we have so many people who refuse to be vaccinated because A, they don't believe in it, or B, there's fear and misinformation about what the vaccine does and how it works and how it was created.
Yes. I mean, the misinformation about COVID-19 has been pretty much nonstop from the beginning of the pandemic, and it's taken on many flavors. At the beginning, there was downplaying of the virus. That became harder and harder as we saw the death toll rising and rising. But then as the vaccinations started to become available, then we saw misinformation targeting vaccinations and having an impact on people wanting to get vaccinated. And that's what we need in order to get herd immunity and stop the virus from spreading. So whether it's downplaying the virus or downplaying the solutions to the virus, all of these things have health implications, and those are real world consequences.
But the issue is even deeper than that, isn't it? I mean, the symptom is maybe the reluctance to embrace the science or the unwillingness to get a vaccine. But the issue really is about the information out there making people feel fearful and feel as though they are somehow going to lose their freedom or their liberties if they do this thing, whatever it is, whether it's the vaccine or vote a certain way in an election.
Yeah, you really put your finger on it. Often science denial isn't really about the science at all. It's actually about other belief systems or even just people's identities. And it can vary across topics. With climate change, the biggest driver of rejecting the science is political ideology. People, as you say, people who don't like some of the solutions to climate change, rejecting that there's a problem in the first place that needs solving. But in other issues, such as evolution science, the ideology there is religious ideology. People don't like people feel like their belief systems are threatened by the scientific evidence, so they reject the science.
And this brings us to very dangerous territory, right? Because it is the absence of common sense, at least in my view. I'm willing to say this.
Well, I guess this is a very dad thing to say, but common sense isn't that common these days. But yeah, I mean, we should all be working from the same set of facts, and we might propose different solutions to that. But if we're not inhabiting the same reality, then it's becomes close to impossible to work together to come up with compromise solutions. And so trying to get everyone on at least the same page in terms of accepting evidence and a shared sense of reality, it's kind of essential to solving society's problems.
And the answer, or one possible way to engage in finding the answer and to inoculate ourselves from the infodemic, is through creative play, right? Because being playful gets us to talk, gets us to communicate. And I think this is why Cranky Uncle has put such a smile on my face. And I'd love for you to tell our listeners about why you developed Cranky Uncle and then how it's been received in the world.
So Cranky Uncle began with my psychological research into countering misinformation. And the principle is fairly straightforward and simple. It's basically when you explain the techniques used to mislead, that inoculates people. People don't like being misled. And it works across the political spectrum because whether you're conservative or liberal, nobody likes being misled. It's like explaining the sleight of hand that a magician uses, and then you can see through the trick. And so I set about trying to come up with engaging ways to explain misleading techniques of misinformation, and happened upon games as a really powerful way of doing it. Firstly, because as you say, it's engaging, it's fun, we use a lot of humor and cartoons in the game. But secondly, games have a particular, set of tools that are really useful in terms of misinformation and critical thinking, because critical thinking is hard. Our brains aren't really hardwired to stop and reason through arguments. But what games let you do is practice critical thinking. And the game just has you practicing spotting misinformation over and over again. And because you accumulate points, you level up, you want to get further and further into the game, that encourages you to practice and practice more. And the more you practice critical thinking, the quicker and better you get at it.
So who can play this game? Is it catered towards youth? Is it catered towards everyone above a certain age? I mean, when you think about critical thinking and when it kicks in the average human brain, if we were to rely upon that, we'd be looking at a population in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have a solid answer to that yet. We're actually collecting data to try to find the answer to that, because originally I designed the game thinking it would probably be college students playing it, and we released the game on iPhone and Android and on browsers to make it as free and accessible to everyone as possible, and certainly a lot of it's being played in a lot of college classes. But what surprised me was a lot of high school teachers signed up to start using the game in their classes, and even middle school teachers. So right now the game is being played in middle school, high school, and college, and we're collecting the data just to see how the different grade levels go. My gut instinct is that it will certainly be effective at a high school level. That's what I'm hearing anecdotally from teachers and students, and possibly middle school. And even if it isn't, then what we'll probably do is create a younger version of the game with simpler examples and simpler language, which should make it more accessible to middle school students.
But, I think the seeds get planted. Even if a child of 12 or 13 or 10 even younger, may not grasp the full spectrum of being able to critically think or solve problems, I think by playing the game, right, you plant the seeds.
Yeah, I think that that introducing students to critical thinking at middle school would be really powerful.
Yeah.
Education needs to be more than just dumping facts into kids' brains. We need to also be teaching them how to think, and part of critical thinking is being able to spot false arguments and logical fallacies, not just in misinformation and out in the world, but in our own arguments as well. I think that, I'm more attuned to using false dichotomies and other different fallacies from the Cranky Uncle game in my own arguments now. Or certainly my wife likes to point out when I use fallacies in my argument.
And a good argument is a good thing, right? There's nothing wrong with a good argument when one is able to engage in the discourse, backed by facts, backed by solid information that helps one critically think. But you can't just say, oh, it's fake, the fake news, it's bad science. No, facts are facts.
Yeah, I mean, a good argument is certainly important, but not just in terms of having a discussion with someone, but even how we make decisions in our lives. We want to make sound decisions based on good logic, and so by learning how to argue, it's not just about having an argument with someone. It's really about thinking logically and having sound arguments for our decision making, and that can permeate all of our life.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we will carry on the conversation with John Cook. We're talking about Cranky Uncle, which is a game that he created and has illustrated as a cartoonist 10 years prior to becoming a scientist, right? This is the sort of integration of all things that you love, isn't it, John?
Yeah, I spent 10 years doing scientific research on how to respond to misinformation.
To learn more about Cranky Uncle, please visit crankyuncle.com. And you can also learn about John's work at skepticalscience.com. You can find him on Twitter at John F.O. Cook. And on Facebook, it's Cranky Uncles and Skeptical Science. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back. And that is a promise.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit harvestinghappiness.com to learn more.
Welcome back. Let's get back to the conversation about infodemic inoculation, exercising thought intelligence through whole brain thinking. Let's go back and talk more with Dr. John Cook. John, I would love for you to just spend a minute talking about the cartooning and your skill set as a cartoonist, as an artist that came prior to becoming a scientist.
Yeah, so for a decade before I started my PhD, I was a cartoonist. And put that aside and started my PhD studying science denial and trying to answer the question, how do you counter misinformation? And after about a decade of research, I learnt about using techniques to explain logical fallacies in misinformation and realized that cartoons were a perfect delivery mechanism for visualizing the logical flaws in misinformation. It was kind of my Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz moment, realizing that I had the answer with me all along. And so I started using cartoons, drawing cartoons to analogize or visualize the different logical flaws in misinformation.
So have you attacked the one about a former presidential candidate who was involved with a Pizzagate scandal and pedophiles? Have you done that one in cartoon?
I haven't looked at Pizzagate specifically. I guess that's more political misinformation, and I've been focusing more on science misinformation. But I certainly have been touching on conspiracy theories, which again, conspiracy theories abound across all issues. There are climate change conspiracy theories, COVID-19 conspiracy theories, and political conspiracy theories. And when a person believes one of them, they tend to believe a cluster of different conspiracies.
So give us a couple of examples of topics that you tackle with Cranky Uncle, and we'll go through the thought experiment with you.
So a common, an annoyingly common argument with climate misinformation is the argument that it's cold, therefore global warming isn't real. And so we see it every winter. As soon as it gets cold, you'll inevitably hear your cranky uncle say, "What happened to that global warming, eh?" And you think, "Yes, uncle." But the logic there, if I can take that logic and transplant it into a parallel situation, it's exactly the same as arguing at nighttime, it's dark, the sun isn't real. It's not looking at the big picture. It's only looking at your immediate experience. And so that's one of the examples I use in the Cranky Uncle game is I'll show a cartoon of Cranky Uncle arguing it's cold, global warming isn't real, and then switch it to a cartoon of Cranky Uncle at nighttime arguing it's dark, the sun isn't real. It's a way to use these cartoon analogies to illustrate logical fallacies.
And when we debunk fuzzy logic, I think there's a little bit of shame, right? For the person who has believed these fallacies and then they are proven wrong. What happens?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one because I guess there you're talking about having conversations with your cranky uncle. What the Cranky Uncle game does is it inoculates players. It educates them on the misleading techniques in misinformation so that they're less likely to be misled. But what the game doesn't do yet is help you to have difficult conversations with your cranky uncle about these kind of contentious issues. And that's a whole other skill set. There are a whole range of techniques, like conversational techniques that you can use to have these difficult conversations, using empathy, having conversations with curiosity and encouraging people to, explain how and why they believe what they believe. Unfortunately, Cranky Uncle doesn't do that yet, but I'm hoping down the track to be able to add a new character to the game. After you've finished with Cranky Uncle, then it unlocks a cordial cousin who will explain how to have these productive but difficult conversations.
I love that. The cordial, as we would say here in the U.S., cousin.
Cordial.
Cordial. And I was thinking, Emily the empath, that she's got to ask powerful, open-ended questions, right?
Empathetic Emily, that might be even better than cordial cousin. It's a working title at this point. We'll have to play around with different options.
Like tell me more. I mean, I think, and that's something that we can always ask, right? We can always find a way to ask a question that sort of desensitizes or takes the sting out of the issue. When somebody, I know for me, in the case of my cranky family members, when I say, tell me more about that, I'm really curious. What does that mean? And then they will, tell me more of their story or what they believe to be the story. And it does offer a little window. Doesn't always work, but it does offer a window.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. It doesn't always work, but at least it gives you a fighting chance. I've had lots of conversations with my own father, who was, I guess, a cranky dad, and he didn't. He wasn't convinced that climate change was real, but over time, just not through a particularly super smart argument or anything, but just having lots of conversations over time, gradually he changed his mind and became more accepting of climate science. But on the other hand, I've also had similar conversations with my father-in-law and never got anywhere. So there's no foolproof trick. I think you just need to be present, be willing to listen to people, be willing to patiently talk to them over time. And sometimes you'll make headway, but other times you won't.
And the climate deniers are a particularly difficult bunch, right? Because they might be very well educated, or they might be well read. They might fully understand cause and effect, but they're completely blind in this area.
Often they have a lot of information at their fingertips, but the information is all there just to support the various climate myths that they like to argue. And all those climate myths have fallacies at their roots. We published an analysis in Environmental Research Letters a couple of years ago now, 2018, and we basically used critical thinking to deconstruct around 50 of the most common arguments from climate deniers, and they all have logical fallacies in them. And when people are motivated to believe something, then they'll just grab any information that will support their belief system. And that happens not just with people who aren't educated, but also with people who are educated, who have more tools to be able to justify their motivated beliefs. So, we do see climate deniers can throw a whole range of different arguments at you. And that's really what the Cranky Uncle game is about. It's about equipping you to be able to see those different fallacies in the range of different arguments you might encounter.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about the power and value of role-playing in this process. When we're trying to really activate greater critical thinking, when we're trying to inoculate ourselves from the infodemic, we can also play the game, put yourself in someone else's shoes kind of thing, and challenge ourselves a bit.
Yes. So the game and also activities like role-playing are really an active form of inoculation. You can be inoculated by receiving explanations of denial techniques, but you can also become inoculated by actively, as you say, putting your mind in, like putting yourself in the position of the science denier. And games are one way of doing that by trying to become the cranky uncle. but also we've done a lot of role-playing exercises in classrooms where you have a simulated conversation where one person is the cranky uncle and the other person is trying to convince them of, say, climate change, and just trying to play that role of cranky uncle and trying to marshal the different arguments encountered in the game is a way of reinforcing what you've just learned about those different techniques and more deeply inoculating yourself. And it's also fun. Like, we've had a lot of fun doing role-playing in classrooms. Usually the way we do it is I'll first do a demonstration with the professor who's teaching the class where I'll be the cranky uncle and they're trying to convince me. And unfortunately, I get very competitive. so then I get crankier and crankier in the role-playing conversation, trying to bamboozle the professor with all the different fallacies. But I think students seem to like that. It's quite fun and entertaining.
Well, I hope our listeners are as delighted by Cranky Uncle as I am, and will seek it out and use it as a tool in their own conversations and their own positive arguments, because like we said earlier, that a good argument is actually a good thing. To learn more about the work of John Cook, please visit crankyuncle.com and skepticalscience.com. On Twitter, you can find John at John F.O. Cook. And on Facebook, those pages are Cranky Uncles and Skeptical Science. John, come back and share more about Cordial Cousin or Empathic Emily whenever. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen and my guests, Andy Norman and John Cook, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Go out and rock your day and be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.